What if I was to tell you that you are the only person who really exists? That everybody else is a flesh and blood robot made by this crazy God to make you think that you're not alone in the world, but in reality, they're just robots, flesh and blood, and you're the only real, whole, complete person with a mind and a heart and a soul and a spirit. What would you think about that? Well, we're going to come back to that. My name's Don. For those of you who don't know me, I am a pastor. I live in Connecticut. That little hypothetical scenario I just gave you actually is really foundational to me and my understanding of spiritual things and what it means to be a pastor. You'll have to hold on a second for that. I know that sounds ludicrous to say, but I'm in Connecticut, and our church is kind of in the shadows of New York City in the middle of this coronavirus. And so, yeah, there's that. We're about 2 weeks away from hitting our peak in Connecticut, is what most models are saying. We don't really know. Thankfully, it looks like it's going better than we thought. But I've been doing a lot of online devotionals and sermons and things like that as we've not been having services to try to encourage, and comfort the people in our church based on what we believe the Bible says and our Christian faith. And I was just thinking about it. I have a lot of friends who are not in church, and I wanted to do a few messages for you as well. Messages to just try to provoke you, prompt you, invite you to think about what you believe and why, and to do it in hopefully a fun way, hopefully a good way that encourages dialogue. And friends, you know who you are. You know I'm thinking about you. I also wanted to post this publicly in case there's other people that want to check it out as well, and just be invited to look at things from a different perspective. One of the things I've experienced is that most people shape their foundational beliefs by the time they're late teenagers or early 20s at the most. And through the rest of their life, they usually aren't willing to re-challenge those core beliefs about who they are, why they're here, what life means, all of those things. And in some ways, that's a real shame. I know it's threatening to really think about those things, but it's also, we have more experience, we have more education, hopefully we have more mental capacity as we get older to really look at those things through a fresh light. And so I just want to encourage you to do that the way that I try to keep doing that myself. So what I'm looking at today is this silly, absurd, hypothetical scenario. There's this crazy God, and he made you, and you're the only person that exists, and everyone else is a flesh and blood robot that is not real. They're just flesh and blood, and they don't have a mind, a heart, and a soul like you do, but they're programmed to act like you so that you don't feel alone. When I do this hypothetical scenario with a live group, I try to invite the smartest person I can find in the group to join me on a stool up during the presentation, and I give them that scenario, and then I pose this challenge. Prove me wrong. Prove to everybody here that I'm not telling the truth and that I'm wrong. Go for it. And it's just kind of a fun exercise because you really can't prove it wrong. And so if you think you can, find somebody who's your intellectual equal and give it a shot. And you're going to find out that no matter what you come up with, there's an alternative explanation that fits that crazy hypothetical situation. I cut them, they bleed. Of course, they're flesh and blood robots. They're meant to convince you they're real. I love them. When I hug them, I feel the warmth. We have emotional connection. Of course, that's what they're designed for, to make you feel like you're not alone. Anything you come up with can be reinterpreted in that light. And yet, we absolutely know that's not true, don't we? I mean, we don't just think it's not true. We know it's not true. And I want to define the way that we use the word know right now. Because when I say we know it's not true, what I mean is we are entirely persuaded it's not true. We will live our life in every way on the belief that that is not true. But the reality is we can't quantifiably prove it's not true. We can't even philosophically prove it's not true. So let's step into the world of the philosophical skeptic. Kind of reminds me a little bit of a little kid that keeps asking why. If you have kids and you think of that toddler phase, hopefully you didn't have to go through this, but they'll ask, why does this happen? You give them an answer, why? Give them an answer, why? They can always ask why another time, and you have to come up with another answer until you finally go, because that's just the way it is, right? You run out of steam and you run out of patience. I think of philosophical skepticism, and no matter what you say, somebody can always say, prove it, and prove it, and prove it over and over and over again. And it gets a little paralyzing after a while. And most of us aren't deeply trained in philosophy. And even when we are, you study philosophers, you got to come to a point like Alvin Plantinga, where you have what's called properly basic beliefs that you just agree you're not going to question anymore and keep saying why and prove it, because you'll just keep spinning your wheels and never get anywhere. And our stupid illustration, I cannot philosophically prove that I am not the only person who really exists and that you are all not robots here. And yet, if I really believed that, you would consider me dangerous, wouldn't you? Because at that point, you don't matter. And if you're in my way, I can just kill you or move you or whatever. And if you have something that I want, I'm totally justified in just taking it. After all, I'm the only real person in this scenario. You're just a flesh and blood robot. You're there for my convenience. I can take what's yours. I can use it. I can exploit you. I can do whatever I want. I can kill you. It doesn't matter. There's no morality anymore because I'm the only real person. And if I really believed that, at minimum, you would make me go to therapy, and at maximum, you would lock me up in a padded cell for the rest of my life because I'm dangerous. But I can't prove it's not true. And you can't prove it's not true, not with philosophy. How about with science? Even there, with science, this is one of those things that, you think about what science is meant to do, right? We isolate and we control variables so that we can run tests. We make hypotheses and then we test them and confirm them and eventually try to build them into facts. And yet there's some questions in life that we just can't isolate the variables. We can't control them, manipulate them. We can't, create an environment in which we can test only that one variable when you get into metaphysical things. Where did I come from? Why am I here? Is there any morality? What happens to me after I die? Is there a guide for me to live my life? Those kind of things are really difficult for the scientific method to actually capture and precisely define, measure, and give results to. So no scientist is going to buy the fact that everybody else is a flesh and blood robot and they're the only real person, but they'd be really challenged to, on a scientific level, prove beyond any doubt that all of those other people really do have a soul, spirit, and mind and feelings like they do, and that they're not really alone, because anything you do could ultimately be questioned and reinterpreted in light of that absurd scenario. You look at science, it gets us back to things like, I don't mean to use cliche terms, but like the Big Bang Theory, that everything started in this single moment that was the catalyst for everything that exists. And even something like that, we look at cause and effect. That's what science is built on. You have an effect, you isolate the variables, you determine the cause. Even that, we can't come to a conclusion that there's this ultimate effect that became the cause of everything else, and we don't know what caused that effect. I don't mean to be hanging out science like it's so limited and all of that. Think about even Christian theology, right? I'm a pastor. I believe in God. And I can say God is the ultimate cause with a capital C, and he's the reason for every effect and everything that he set into motion with his creation. But by definition, I'm saying God doesn't have a cause. He is the cause. And I can't answer the question, so where did God come from? Well, how did God come into existence? All of those things. The answer is simply that he always was. Well, even with the scientific method, you're kind of eventually stuck with matter and energy just are. They just exist. And it's almost similar to like a pantheistic view where matter and energy are eternal and just keep cycling through, although pantheism would add some kind of a moral or spiritual element to that. All I'm saying is no matter what research approach you take, eventually you hit a wall you can't break through. Eventually you hit a curtain that you can't peek behind. Eventually our human scientific endeavor hits a point where we're left with saying we see the effect and we can't isolate and prove the cause, the same way that a Christian is saying that about God. And yet, we absolutely know that we're not the only person that exists and everybody else is a robot made of flesh and blood to convince us that we're not alone. And we know it, and we're convinced of it, and we live our lives based on it. So I want to introduce kind of the framework for the discussions that I want to have with you And that is that I'm not trying to philosophically prove anything beyond any possible shadow of doubt. I'm not trying to scientifically demonstrate anything and prove that it is factual and therefore true. I'm going to treat you like you're the jury, because that's what you are. I think the best metaphor for how we live our lives and our moral compass and what we believe about where we came from and why we're here and where we're going, and is there a moral compass for our lives? Are there consequences for our actions? I think the best metaphor for all of that is the courtroom, not the philosophical skeptic classroom and not the scientific laboratory, but the courtroom. And you're the jury, and you decide what is convincing, and you decide what persuades you most, not who can prove something beyond any shadow of a doubt. And the reality is, I think sometimes when we hear somebody say something we don't like, we can hide behind the philosophical skeptic, or we can push back from the scientific method model, when in reality, we just don't want to be open to being persuaded. We don't want to think about what they have to say and consider it and see if it makes the most sense of life as we understand it and all of the data about life that we accumulate. And so you're not just the jury in the courtroom, you're also the judge. And what I mean by that is the judge determines what is allowed to be admitted as evidence and what is discarded. And so that's kind of the nature of these discussions. I just want to encourage you to think about some things again as an adult, as you're going through a situation that has kind of upended everything and created a lot of fear and uncertainty for people. I just want to invite you to take a fresh look at what you believe and why you believe it, and how persuaded you really are by it, and how much sense it makes of the world around you, and how much it satisfactorily answers all of those questions, and basically just how well is it actually working for you, those kind of things. And you're the judge, and you're the jury, and you already have been the judge and the jury, whether you realize it or not. Everything about how you live your lives has already run through that filter of what makes the most sense to you, of what's the most congruent with your experience, and what has persuaded you the most. I mean, the Bible, when we talk about that, what we're saying is your faith is proven by your actions. In other words, your faith, what you believe, this mental framework, is actually exposed and seen for what it really is, not so much by what you say, but by what you actually do. Because we can say a lot of things. Talk is kind of cheap. But when the rubber meets the road, where do you spend your time? Where do you spend your money? What do you do, with moral issues and questions? When are you selfish? When are you unselfish? How? Why? All of those kind of things come back to what has persuaded you most, and therefore what you will really act on, not just what you'll say, because then we can run into the philosophical skeptic, and then we can run into the scientific laboratory, and we can, come up with great sounding things. But the bottom line is you're living your life. I think of lyrics from Mumford & Sons. Now I'm blanking on the lyrics because I love this. In this body we will live, in this body we will die. How you invest your love is how you invest your life. And then their conclusion is you were made to meet your maker. It's a great song. But anyway, I don't think they're Christian, but it just fits with what I'm saying right now. So I wanted to quote it anyway. Love Mumford & Sons. They're great. Hey, take care, friends. I love you. Visitors, I hope we can have some great dialogue and that I can really spark you to think. Please feel free to text message me. Please be kind, considerate, and respectful to anyone in comments, or I will have to just shut down the post and take those away. I want this to be genuinely an intriguing dialogue where we invite each other to think, and if no name calling, no getting mad at anybody, nothing like that. Love you guys. Praying for you through this challenging time. God bless you.